Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Blitzkrieg, our own strategic affairs show. Much has been made about armored corps formations in Ladakh as the Indian Army is face to face, eyeball to eyeball with the Chinese. People are talking about light tanks. Now, what are light tanks? Why should you find the armored corps at heights of 14, 15, 16,000 feet above sea level? Today, I have a very distinguished guest with me, Lieutenant General KJ Singh, former Army Commander, Western Command, and also Co-Commander, who at one point in time looked after armored formations in Sikkim, specially because Sikkim has high altitude areas. Now, we're going to talk to the General and find out why tanks are important in high altitude areas and why light tanks are or are not the silver bullet. Sir, Jai Hind, and a very warm welcome to our show, sir.
Jai Hind, Gaurav. Firstly, let me thank and inviting me to your this very well liked and well watched program. And as per the name of this program, Blitzkrieg, you've chosen a very topical and relevant point today. And so thank you for having me here. You brought up this issue about light tanks.
Sure.
So firstly, Gaurav, let me tell you that light tank is not the silver bullet. It's not something which is a panacea, which will find all the answers. You need a family of tanks, and while India may not have the typical light tank, but the mix of armored fighting vehicles and platforms that we have today in Ladakh, we have no cause to get worried. And this big hype about Chinese technology and that technology will disable us and will paralyze us has not proved right. 4.5 months down the line, we have not seen any of those effects. So please be rest assured, we have an optimum mix of tanks. We have inducted them over there, and we are ready to take any challenge.
Sir, so my question to you is, sir, why tanks? Because normally when we speak about the armored corps, whether it's tanks of various shades and varieties or even BMPs, sir, what comes to mind is the Western theatre. What comes to mind are the plains of Punjab, Rajasthan, Gujarat, Jammu, that area, sir, which have seen battles. But then again, there is that famous incident of Zojila, sir, Colonel Rajendra Singh Sparrow and tanks in Zojila, which goes back to 1947-48. So it's not something that is happening today. But for the information of our viewers, sir, why armored corps? Why tanks at such a great height?
Gaurav, you know the terrain because you've seen it
Sure.
yourself.
Sure.
In those areas, there are plateaus. There are, like in Sikkim, across us, we have an area which is called Chagola Plains. It is called PP Plains.
Sure.
So these are plateaus and plains where armored fighting vehicles can be easily utilized. And our opponent, China, has got huge, big focus on mechanization. One of their goals of the centennial modernization goal is mechanization. That's why China has brought in 4 motorized division and 6 mechanized division opposite us. So while it is okay that tanks don't have to be per se combated only with tanks, there is an anti-tank layout. You have surveillance, you have self-propelled and direct firing artillery, you have ATGMs, you have attack hepters, you have mines, you have obstacles, and then you also need tanks. So there is a family of vehicles and anti-tank layout which is required in those areas, because like if you see this Pangur Gap, it is a gateway to Chushu. So you have to close it. You can't allow China, or you see the Depsang Plains. If China gets in over there, then it has got direct access to Daulat Beg Oldie and closes and links up with Siachen and Sakshgam Valley. All those strategically important areas come into one package, and we have to stop that.
Sir, something comes to mind when you say all these things. Now, you have armored corps there, sir. You have mechanized infantry there. You have artillery there. You have, of course, you have the infantry there. And then there is this entire element of the Air Force, the Army Aviation, etc., including helicopter gunships, including fighter jets, including, transport helicopters and everything else, transport aircraft also, sir. Now, generally, what we are taught in the army is that in let us say modification D or even in planes, even outside desert, you have an FUP. But what they say in the mountains is that you don't have an FUP. Classically, you would have a release point or something like that, sir. But when you have all these elements there at 16,000 feet, please explain to our viewers, sir, how is it different, with tanks fighting at those altitudes? Because if all the elements of the planes are there, almost all the elements of the planes, I mean, you have artillery, you have everything, sir. How is it different, sir? How is it different? How is life different for a soldier, for an armored corps regiment at that height?
Most of our tanks have come from Russia, and all Russian tanks are optimized to fight in high altitude areas and winter warfare conditions. They have preheaters. When we got these tanks, T-55s and T-54s and T-72s, they came custom fitted with preheaters. We removed them because we were using them in deserts and all.
Yes.
We didn't need it over there.
Sure.
So typically, Russian tanks have been used in these areas, and it is what you really require is an agile tank. We have been saying light tank, but we really require an agile tank. So this agile tank has to be versatile also. So, and tanks can't be bought just for Ladakh. You can't say, I'll have a Ladakh tank. You need a tank which can also be used in riverine terrain, Siliguri corridor. You can also use it in Bhuj. You can use it in island territories. You can apply it in the out of area contingencies. You can use it for UN operations. So for all these areas, you have a versatile kind of a tank, which is built on a systems approach. And you can also use it in Ladakh. And this agile tank opens up avenues for you. And Gaurav, allow me to tell you, Chinese are great masters at psychological kind of manipulation. The so-called Chinese light tank is not really light. Typically, light tank is about 26, 28 tons. The Chinese tank is 34 to 36 tons. It has 105 millimeter gun. It doesn't even have missile firing capability, which our BMPs have got it. It is not amphibious. So it is some kind of a jugaad to call it light tank and to psychologically unnerve people. It has got better mobility. It has got, typically you have a power to weight ratio. You have the tank's weight balanced against the power which is generated by engines. And like you were asking in high altitude, what happens? There is a drop of 20 to 25% in your engine output. So your power goes down. Suppose you have a 1000 horsepower engine, it will only give you about 750. So this Chinese tank is got about 1000 horsepower, effective 750. It is power to weight ratio, they advertise 30, but it is actually 24 to 25. So it is some kind of a compromise of sorts. When we make our light tank, which we are trying to make, I'm sure we will take care of these things.
So you spoke about, if I may call it, inter-theater movement. You said that you can't have a tank specifically for Ladakh or high altitudes. It should function perfectly in riverine conditions, in desert, in plains, even outside during UN operations, etc. Which is that tank, to your mind, sir, in India and globally? Now, there are all sorts of articles, whether you talk about Jane's Defense Weekly or other magazines, where they say that this is the tank which is really good. So people are talking about M1A1 Abrams, which is a very, very heavy tank. So then you're talking about the Leopard series from Germany, sir, and there is the Markava from Israel and other tanks also. We have our own Arjun, which is, I think, roughly 60 tons, give or take, sir. Give or take a few tons. It's almost 60 tons. It's a heavy tank. Which is a tank that you think is good for inter-theater movement? Which is a tank that you think can operate everywhere, sir?
See, Gaurav, there is one tank which is being sort of touted. People are saying it is Sprat of Russia. It is 18 tons. But we should not rest there. I think this is Atmanirbhar moment. Currently, we are well poised, so we need not do emergency purchases. We must build our own light tank, which DRDO is quite capable of doing it with accelerated kind of with some joint production, taking some help from outside. So one option is there is K9 Vajra self-propelled chassis. which is being recently inducted. We have inducted about 100 of K9 SP guns. Now, if that chassis is taken and on that you put a lighter turret and you put a gun of say 125 millimeter, put a missile firing platform, and you give it all the basic optronics, then you can come out with a very agile kind of a tank in weight category of about 30 tons and a power to weight ratio of about 30. So that would be our own version. And I think we should go this way. We should build an ecosystem and build on this capability. And also, Gaurav, I must tell you, we are inducting for infantry bulletproof vehicles, which are 6 by 6. So it is the moment to ramp up this capability also and make 8 by 8 wheeled platforms. Because after all, if you saw those clashes near Galwan, Chinese came with Humvee type of vehicles. It is very sort of, it is intimidating tactics. And our infantry also deserves it. Why not? Even in counterinsurgency areas, the commanders should be able to go protected to those areas. So this is the moment for us to develop an ecosystem, a family of vehicles, do some collaboration with our, outsiders, maybe take some help from Israel. But Israeli platforms are heavy, Gaurav. So with that, the Korean chassis and some research by our people, I think in 2 to 3 years we should be able to make a good functional platform, which will be then can be utilized for various things. We can be utilized for a missile carrier, can be used for infantry in a scaled down version, can be used for air defense platforms. And Gaurav, there is huge big talk of disruptive technologies. Now, when you will have disruptive technologies and you have to apply them in field, you need a protected platform. Costly technology, you'll not field it on a Jonga or a Jeep or such kind of vehicle.
Yes.
You need a protected, agile platform. So this can even work for that. So for future role, it's a good idea to invest through the Atmanirbhar route and make our own agile platform.
So, sir, I was thinking of asking you another question, but your answer set me thinking. You mentioned Atmanirbhar Bharat a few times during your answer, sir, and that set me thinking. What is the reason that we have not been able to actually produce something like that? Our defense industry is not up to the mark, and the Prime Minister has been constantly at it, telling people that we need to become net exporters rather than net importers. Till very recently, sir, we were the only nation in the world which was importing so much or the highest importing nation as far as weaponry is concerned. Now we are gladly at, I think, happily at number 2 or number 3 as we speak today. But that's not a cause of much happiness. I mean, much more needs to be done. What is the problem? So why aren't we able to do it?
The problem is there. We have to change our approach. We have to invest. We have to do firm hand holding, do some collaboration also. Prime Minister himself said that it is not totally, it's not something which is closed. You have to collaborate also. So take some things from Israel and like-minded countries like South Korea in this case for the chassis. And with that, I think we'll be able to get over this problem.
Sir, I'll go back to Ladakh with this. Till now, while as Corps Commander, you did a lot of work as far as the Armored Corps tanks were concerned in Sikkim, sir. But at the same time, generically speaking, the thought process has been Armored Corps to the west, sir. That has been the generic thinking, sir. Armored Corps to the west, and Modification M, or the fighting in mountains, was considered mostly infantry. Now, with, of course, mountain to mountain, the terrain differs, sir. So you have one kind of mountain in which you cannot have tanks at all because the mountain does not permit. But here you have plateaus, you have places where armored formations can move. So do you think post East Ladakh, sir, if I may call it post East Ladakh, though it's slightly difficult because the tensions are still there, still very much there. Do you think there is going to be a change in strategic thinking in the Indian Army, saying that we need to deploy more Armored Corps formations there, sir? Do you think there is a need for a rethink in the Indian Army, sir?
We may not have to increase numbers. We may make our platforms more versatile, have a better mix, optimize them, And also, we should think of a revolution in our organizations. Like typically, we are in silos. Where is the harm in having an integrated combat group where you have two squads of medium tanks and one squad of agile light tanks, or have a mechanized infantry battalion which has got one squad of light tanks? You need to integrate, you need to have even attack helicopters in support so that your responses are faster, more integrated, and synergized. So let us use this opportunity to, we don't have huge big budgets to now start having tanks all over. We have enough tanks there. We need to have better tanks, optimized ones. We need to integrate our organizations, and our thinking has to become more mobile in that.
So sometimes I think that inter-services coordination is more of a problem than China. So China we can sort out, but sometimes this ability of the Army, Navy, and Air Force to get along together, it's happening, sir. I just wish it happened faster. My next question, sir, is something that is very close to my heart, which I always wanted to ask you. Is that, sir, sir, we have 3 strike corps facing Pakistan, sir. And now we have a strike corps in Panagarh, sir, 17 corps, which is China specific, but it's still work in progress. It will take time. Have we ignored China for a very long time, sir? Have we ignored China? Because I remember George Fernandez making that statement in and around the atomic when those nuclear blasts took place in Pakistan and in India, sir, that the real enemy is China. He said it, and people said that he's not in his senses, he does not know what he's talking about. But he made that very prophetic statement at that point in time. He says the real enemy is not Pakistan, the real enemy is China. So do you think we've been wanting somewhere in our strategic outlook 3 strike corps facing Pakistan? None. If you discount 17 corps Panagarh for the moment, sir, because it's still work in progress, none facing China. Is there a problem in our strategic thinking, sir?
Gaurav, there is, in the sense we've been doing rebalancing. If you see, air base of Hashimara is getting reactivated. Air Force didn't have any surveillance or worthwhile surveillance or radars, and we didn't have worthwhile air defense in Eastern Theater and on the northern borders. So rebalancing is taking place. But you are right, we should do more. We have not given it the kind of focus that we should have given. Also, somewhere there was a feeling that we'll be able to manage China diplomatically. After all, there was Wuhan spirit. There was a feeling that China will not come to this kind of situation, and we need to build up our economy. And for the moment, let's focus on western borders. But now we have realized there is no choice. And the government has also increased the budget for infrastructure development. There is a new kind of vigor which has been attached to tunneling projects and strategic highways. So, and I think the Mountain Core project is going to get reinvigorated. So, yes, we need to rebalance. We need to shift focus, and northern borders should become our primary focus. But we can't even ignore the western borders.
Sir, do you think, or do you get a sensing that maybe our foreign policy mandarins, or maybe the people who guide our foreign policy, the foreign policy experts, they still haven't accepted the fact that China, cannot be trusted? I was reading somewhere, and I believe very strongly that we should not lose what we gained on the battlefield. We should not lose it on the negotiating table when we are talking to the Chinese, because the Chinese respect strength, and today the Indian Army is there on the border, fully deployed, and as the Americans say, sir, weapons hot. And this is something that the Chinese never expected from the Indian Army, because we were always talking about peace, and China thought we were totally harmless. But that didn't go down very well with Xi Jinping. So today, there is this thing when I hear noises coming out of the foreign policy establishment in India, when I see all these statements coming out from there, sir, it gives me a sense that we're still saying that no, you can talk to the Chinese, and maybe that's a diplomat's role, sir. I speak as a soldier because while we can also talk, sir, but we believe more in what is happening on ground in the battlefield, the sense that we might lose on the negotiating table what we have gained on the battlefield with a lot of blood, sir, with a lot of blood, with a lot of sacrifice. What's your feelings?
Current round of diplomatic negotiations are working on two firm bases. One is of Galwan, the incident of 15th of June, and second is our proactive and preemptive securing of Spangur Gap. If we didn't have these two things, our diplomatic negotiations wouldn't have had the firm base. Firm base has got provided by the strength
Absolutely.
that our troops on the ground have gained for us. So that is true. Whatever we do, we have to build our capability. And I will go along with you. We need to reorient, like we call it China Study Group. What are we studying China? It should be China Strategic Response Group. Why should it be studying? We want to respond to China in a strategic manner. So let's start calling it by the correct name. Let's have theater commands. And I would go to the extent of saying, where is the harm in commands where we have border liaison and border meetings, putting MEA reps over there? They should become part of those command headquarters so that they can pick up the sense, they can take part in these negotiations. Like we hear a talk that in the next round of Corps Commanders meeting, some diplomats are also going to go and attend. So such kind of, after all, China does it. If you saw the defense minister delegation of China, it was all uniform. And what was Indian delegation? All in civis, except for defense attaché, one person. So these are the times I think the domain experts, the people who know about this, are incorporated, and we have a whole of nation response. So let's not work in silos over here. Diplomats should take military experts, and they should also get integrated, in my perception, even at the theater level. And in MEA, we should have defense reps so that we can work out our policies jointly. Can't have theoretical policies.
No, absolutely, sir. I'm a very, very strong votary and a very strong supporter of the fact that you must integrate the three services in our foreign policy, sir. Without it, it cannot be done. Sir, my last question to you, sir, is I was thinking that I should not ask you this question because it will become slightly controversial, but then I said, how does that matter? Let's make it controversial, sir. Do you think we find ourselves in a bind because the armed forces have been kept out of policy decision making, sir, especially foreign policy? You keep out soldiers and then you're surprised one day by the Chinese that, we thought there was this Wuhan spirit. Now, there is no Wuhan spirit, sir. There is obviously a Galwan spirit. There is no Wuhan spirit. And that's what I wanted to ask you about, sir. And I would request for a candid response, you being a soldier yourself, sir, that why is it that the soldiers, the uniformed people, our generals, and equivalent in the Navy and the Air Force, are kept out of this very important decision making when you decide a policy framework, sir?
Gaurav, there are two or three factors in this. One is there is this philosophy of coup-proof. There's a fear, if it has happened in Pakistan, Myanmar, and such like countries in our neighborhood, and Bangladesh also had military rule for a while, there is this fear that as if armed forces people will take over. It won't happen. Our armed forces are too trustworthy for such a thing. And if you see Wuhan spirit also, our MO directorate gave elaborate strategic guidance to all the commanders. And we have followed it. We are mature people, I think. So somewhere there should be better sort of, like we have National Defense College. Some policy makers should come and attend classes. If they're not free for entire year, for some period, armed forces people should be put in over there. Because after all, you see countries like America and all, their major policy makers have been armed forces people. If you give them a chance, I'm sure they will perform. They'll give you the same kind of results. So even if there is some deficiency on our side, we can be educated. We can be put through some structured training and we can pick up the ropes from there. But I fully go along with your suggestion that there is a need to integrate in this domain also.
Thank you very much for joining us, sir. And it's been an honor and a privilege to host you on this show. Ladies and gentlemen, with Lieutenant General KJ Singh, former GOC&C, Western Command, the general spoke about light tanks and said that the light tank is not a silver bullet. You need to have a whole array of armored platforms operating at those heights to counter the Chinese. And in the end, he also spoke about how various departments, various organizations need to come out of their silos, whether it's the armed forces or the Ministry of External Affairs, and have a joint sort of response to whatever China is doing, whether in policy making or even on ground. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again next week with another episode of Blitzkrieg. Till then, from my team and I, Jai Hind.